All right, so we've got a file to download today, Google Sheets 2.xlsm. We got a question? Yeah, oh my goodness, there's an assignment for next Wednesday and I forgot about it. When I put that, I thought we should have one more assignment in the semester, and then I was going to do it sometime, and I forgot to do it. So why don't we do this? Why don't we make it another homework assignment? I will give you all full credit for it, and you don't have to do anything. So will you? Wow, if I knew that's what it took to get applause, I'd be canceling assignments all over the place. Database project canceled. No, I'm just kidding. Oh! Can't do that one. Will you email me and just remind me to do that? Actually, copy the TA, tell him to do it. So yeah, just give everyone full credit for that. It's probably, there's probably already an assignment there. Just give everyone 10 points. Okay. Other questions? All right. So while you're getting that file downloaded, what we're going to do today is we're going to see how can we work with Google Sheets. How can we get data like into Google Sheets from Excel? I kind of push data up to Google Sheets and pull it back down using VBA and Excel. What we are not trying to do is we're not trying to automate Google Sheets in the same way that we automate Excel, right? With VBA, we can say, go to this range, put this value into it, put this formula here, add a new sheet. We can do all those kinds of things. Can you do that with Google Sheets? Yeah, but not with VBA. Well, the right way to do that is to learn the native automation language for Google Sheets, which is, do you know what it's called? What's that? Well, it's kind of a variant of JavaScript, but it's actually called Google Apps Script. When they were thinking of the name, they could have thought of a better one than Apps Script, but that's what it is. It's very, very similar to JavaScript. And so if that's what you need to do, that's probably how I recommend that you do it. Now, another possibility is Google Sheets has an API. I mean, it's expecting to have like other programs work with it, interact with its data. And we can do that through VBA because it's just like making web calls. And so you can do that, but it's really pretty complex. It's beyond what we're ready to do in this class. So you could do it that way. But what we're going to do today is we're just going to use Google Sheets like a data repository. We're going to push data to it, and then, with VBA, and then we'll use VBA to pull that data back down. So the idea is I could have lots of different people putting data up there, and then I can pull it back down through a separate process. So that's where we're headed today. So the first thing is I have a form here, a Google form that's already created. Let me come back to the questions. And I guess the idea here is that I'm interested to see kind of study bias in Excel's random number generating procedures. By the way, do any computers generate random numbers? The answer is no. There's nothing random in a computer at all. So how do we have a random number generator? We call them random number generators. What is a random number generator in a computer? Do you know what it is? A random number generator is just it's really just a really complex function that if you take the output that it gave you and feed that back in as the input, it'll give you another number, and that sequence of numbers that you generate with that process looks really random. But it's not, right? If you gave it that same number again, it will always produce the second number, the next number in that sequence. How many of you notice this when you're doing big boggle, that you would like throw the same game multiple times? Anyone notice that? Yeah, it's because it's really not random. So we do things to try to seed, you said seed. We do things to try to seed the random number generator to say, well, you know what, let's just kind of jump to some arbitrary place in here so we don't, get the same sequence every time. But nothing's really random. And so I'm curious to find out, do we see any bias in the Excel random number generator? And so to do that, I'm going to have all of you help me by generating hundreds of observations. We'll push them up to the Google Sheet. We'll pull it back down onto my machine, and then we'll kind of take a look at it. Well, if we get that far, we'll take a look at it and see, does it look like these are all, is there any bias, towards one direction or the other? There was kind of back in the early days of computing in the 1970s, one of the IBM systems had a random number generator, and it turned out that every third number that it produced was highly correlated. So you take every third number and say, what's the correlation coefficient of this sequence of numbers, it was pretty high. So kind of an interesting question. Not a terribly interesting one, just a somewhat interesting question. All right, so I have set up here then just this form. And how many of you are already familiar with, have you ever made a Google form? By a show of hands. Yeah, a bunch of times. Wow, but only maybe less than half of you here. Or maybe that's just people who are listening. How many have never made a Google form? A few of you here, okay. So here's the idea with the Google form is that you just build a form, you put questions, and you got different kinds of questions. This question could be short answer, paragraph, check boxes, drop down, scale, grid, these kinds of things. I've just got these all set up as short answer questions. So I'm going to have you put, let's see, let me go ahead and edit this. I think if I click on the I, yeah, I can preview this form. So I'll put my name in here. This is me. And then the idea here is that I'm going to put in a bunch of ones and zeros. So, and ultimately, these are going to be generated by Excel and put in here, but I'm starting off just by making a regular form. So in this case, I'll put a 1, then I did a 1. I think there's 20 of these. This will take a while. 2, maybe I should tab. Not 2, 1 or 0. 0, tab, 0, tab, 0, tab, 1. Okay. So those are my random numbers. I will submit it, and then Google just collects that. Where does Google put that information? Well, it just holds it in the form until I tell it where to put it. So if I come back here to my sheet, I can look at my responses, and I have one response. Oh, let's see. Yeah, you have this link is actually in the form, so is in the Excel workbook that you downloaded. So we'll get there in a second. I don't really need you to add it in by hand, just to understand that that's the process, what it's meant for. And I think I've already got these set up to look in a worksheet, so there it is. There's the response in my Google Sheet, the data that I just put in. So, on the one hand, that itself might be useful, right? You create a Google form, and you're actually having humans enter the data into it, and it might be nice to be able to pull that in automatically into Excel. And so we will be doing that, but we're going to start off by pushing the data up as well. So it's kind of two different processes to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and go to the worksheet that we downloaded for today. Oh, actually, before we do that, we need to kind of understand a little bit about really what's going on here. So I'm going to come back to where I'm submit another response. So here's my form. And when I submitted, confirm form response, reload, continue. Okay, so when I got here, it tells me my response has been recorded. I think I probably recorded that one again. Yeah, so I recorded that one twice. Stan got one in there as well. Good work, Stan. And okay, but we can see here, this is the URL that it went to, right? So when any time that we're submitting data through a web form, we're actually going to some web resource. We're communicating with the server, and that's the script that we're communicating with. But do you see in the URL the actual values that I submitted? No, it's just they're not visible there. So to understand really what's going on here, and to understand our next step, to understand a little bit about the HTTP or HTTPS protocol. So what's a protocol? Protocol is just a set of rules about how you communicate. And so HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTPS, Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, one's encrypted, one's not, but gets the job done the same way, just says, right, what are the rules that we're going to follow when we communicate between two computers? And so there's about 4 different methods that we can use to send information using this protocol, the HTTP protocol. 2 of them absolutely dominate all the traffic that we have out there. They are called GET and POST. There's also PUT, and I think there's a delete, but those are almost never ever used. GET and POST are the main ones. And here's the idea. Here's what we say. Listen, if you're going to communicate between a browser and a server, and you are just getting data back from the server, you should use the GET protocol. However, if you're making a communication with the server, and what you're doing is going to change something on the server, you should use the POST protocol. So it's called get and post. Post, you're posting information to the server. Get, you're getting information from the server. And so, and it's a fundamental difference in the way that they communicate. It's not a big difference, but it's an important difference. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back, submit another response, and I'm just going to look at this form. So there's, you know, there's an HTML form underlying this page that we're seeing here. So I'll do Control-Shift-I or right-click and inspect. Actually, I'll do this. I'll right-click and inspect on one of these answer locations. So that will bring up my inspector. Oh, no, it took me right there as well. Okay, so that is the input object that actually allows me to type information in here. I'm just going to look up the structure until, kind of up the hierarchy here until I find the form. Here's the form. I know that's tiny. Can I zoom in? Here's the form. It says action is, and action is where this form is going to submit the data. So the action is docs.google.com forms, this long line form response. And I'm off of it, but let me go back to it over here. That should be what we see up here. Yeah, form response, docs, google.forms, that whole long thing. So that's where it's sending the information. And then target is self, which means it's not going to a different window. It's got an ID. So if we're going to try to work with Selenium on this, that's nice. Then right here is the method post. So it says the way that we're going to communicate is using the post method. And that's what it should do. Why? Because it's changing the server. I'm putting data onto the server. The other main one is get. Let me just change this to get, G-E-T. So I've just changed the way this form is going to communicate with the server. It's going to now send the information by get, and it'll be a really important difference for us. Here's the big difference. Under post, there's two parts of the request. There's a header and there's a body. And when I send information under post, all of the parameters of the form, all the data I'm submitting with the form goes in the body of the request, not in the header. What's the big difference? Well, the big difference is if it's in the header, you see it in the URL. So the reason we didn't see that information was part of the body, but when we change this to get, we will actually see that response in the header. So let me go ahead and put another one in here. My answer, I'm a student, I'll put my name in capitals, and I'll be sure to know that that's the one I'm doing. I'll put in a bunch of ones. One, tab. And now I'll submit this. But what we're going to see now is that instead of ending with form response the way this one does, ends with form response, that's the one that actually had the data put in the body. This one, form response question mark, and then here's all the data that I submitted. It's all part of the URL. Now, according to the protocol, if I'm changing the data, I should be using post. If I'm just getting data from the server, I should be using get. But that's just, it's not like a hard and fast rule. Lots of folks violate that rule, and we just violated the rule. We used get to send information to Google, and Google took all those parameters and looked at it and said, great, I'll put this into the database. So those values should also be showing up in my sheet. Yeah, there it is. Capital, Gov, and a whole bunch of ones. Now, the reason that that's interesting is because this shows us what we need to be able to work with the data on the back end of the server. So let me come find that question mark again. Right here's the question mark. I'm going to copy this and put it into a notepad so we can see a little bit better. All right, the question mark is what separates the script that I'm interacting with the data that I'm sending to it. So everything after the question mark is the data. And I'm going to bring this down to the next line. And everything up to the ampersand, if I see an ampersand symbol here, that's separating the variables. So I'm just going to kind of quickly find these ampersands. And at least the first part of these, break them into individual statements. And there's 20 of them. So here's what the way this form is set up is it says, listen, it has a parameter called entry 257173496. And it knows that whatever value I give to this parameter, to this name, it says, great, that is the answer to the first question on the form. And here's the answer to the second question on the form. Here's the answer to the third question on the form. Typically, when you're working with a form that someone has written by hand, these are a lot more meaningful names. Telephone number, address, email address. They're things you could understand. In this case, this is all generated automatically by Google, and so they're not really trying to make it meaningful. They don't even know what the question's about when you made it. So they just use a number, but this then is the key that allows me to put this value into a particular place on that database on the back end if I can send the request the right way. So what I need to do, and by the way, that little plus is actually how they encode a space. So I put a space on the end of my name accidentally, and so it went in there with a space. That gets encoded as a plus because a space is not allowed to be in a URL. Go ahead.
So will those codes change every time you pull up a new form?
The question is, will these codes change every time I pull up a new form? And the answer is, if I make a new form, yes. But if I just open that form again to submit more data, no. They will be the same for each time this form is shown. So if we can build a URL that looks just like this long URL, we should be able to push data to the Google Sheet. And fortunately, I've done the heavy lifting for us, because that's really not what this class is about. So if we look over here, I've got the URL to the form response URL here. And then these should be those same numbers. Let me just check that first one. Oh yeah, 717-3496. 717-3496. So yeah, those are the right ones. So this data that we have here on the worksheet just says, use the random number generator to pick a 0 or a 1. And if I come here and press F9 to recalculate the sheet, we'll see that those change. I'm then saying right here, I have all of the 21 different names of those fields for the data that I'm going to be submitting. And then here, I'm just bringing those together, right? So I've got the entry equals, and then whatever value is there, ampersand. Don't put any spaces in here. It won't encode correctly. If you put a space, put a plus instead of a space, and it'll actually go in as a space into the database. Here then is just a formula that takes this URL and concatenates on all of these to give me that the whole long request. In fact, if I take this, let me go ahead and change this to someone else. We've got Nephi there. We should see that change right here in the URL. I should now be able to take that URL, come to a brand new worksheet or a brand new web browser page, enter that, and that should push that data to the Google Doc. Let's take a look and see if it went in. Yeah, there's Nephi. So that's the one that we just put in. So now, we've just taken data from our sheet and we've put it onto the Google form. We've moved it from Excel into Google Docs kind of by going through this form interface that Google's made available. So now we just need to make this part happen automatically. Let's give it a look. My heavens, what have I done? View, Project Explorer. So, oh, this is probably mod encrypt. That's mod encrypt. We don't want mod encrypt. I'm not sure if we'll get to mod encrypt today. We may not. Let me just close all of these, open up the one I want. So let's take a look at module 1. So module 1 shows yet another way for us to see how to interact with a web server. We have seen 3 ways so far from VB8 to interact with a web server. Do you remember what they are? One we did right at the very beginning of class, like the third or fourth day of class. I know that was a long time. I know it was before the midterm, so you've forgotten everything. But 3 ways that we've seen so far to interact with a web server from VBA. The web query was the first one that we did, right? So that's kind of built into Excel. We could record it and get some code. We've also seen how to automate IE. Didn't work so well for us this time. And then last time we were together, we saw how to use Selenium. So this is yet another way. So there is an object called the Microsoft XML HTTP object. It's just an object that knows how to send a request using the HTTP protocol to a server and to get the response back. We don't spend a whole lot of time here because this does not make it very easy to be able to log in somewhere, to kind of maintain a session, for that web server to know who you are and to remember that you have permissions there. You can do it with this object, but it is a lot of heavy lifting to do it. But if you're just making a simple request, it's not a bad one to do. So like many of the objects we're working with, you have to add a reference to this one. So same thing here. I've already added the reference in this workbook, so it should be there already. But if you're kind of trying to do this in a new workbook, I've got the note here to help you remember to get the right reference in here. We declare the object, so I'm calling it HTTP. I could say as a new MS-XML2 HTTP 6.0 or 6.0 object, but I could also say later I can bind it onto a new one. So it's the same approach. I'm then setting up a URL. I'm telling it to open that object using the get method and that URL. The false says it's not a background query. In other words, wait until the page comes back before you move on. I then send that request and I'm printing the results back. If I run this, I should see the HTML from BYU's web page. It might be a redirect that I get, or I might get access denied. What's going on with that? I don't want access denied. Let's try Google. I don't want access denied at all. That's interesting. Go ahead. So the question is it possible for me to do something to set here my references, tools references, so that this, you don't have to do this each time. Oh, actually the reference may not be here already. XML is here, but what did I say we have to have? Microsoft XML, oh no it is, XML 6.0. I do not know of any way to say, you know what, I always want these in every project that I make. So you've got to go and tell the ones that you want for each project. I would be surprised, not only do I not know it, I would be surprised if there is a way. But I'm also curious to know why this isn't working. What do I have? I'm not in edit mode over here. Is everyone getting the same answer here? Access denied, or did that work for anybody? Access is denied. Let me look, you just look at a different way to get these objects to see if that works for us. VBA, XML, HTTP. Whoops. Ooh, yours worked for Google? Okay, this one will create the object. Well, this almost gets to your question, is that you don't have to put those references in. You can usually create the objects directly without the reference. The problem is you don't get any IntelliSense help in that case. But we might be okay with here as well. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set HTTP equal to just create this object. This would probably still work, but I am going to do it as object. Oh, really? Let's go back. I like that better. www. I'm surprised by that. Obviously, since I wrote the example. byu.edu. And we'll run that. There we go. Thank you. So this is, putting off just whatever the HTML of this web page is. But one of the really nice things about this object is that it's really pretty fast. There's not much overhead involved. Faster than Chrome? And the answer is, yeah, faster than Chrome. Why? And the answer is because it doesn't load anything besides the HTML. When you go to Chrome, first thing it does is get the HTML. It looks through all the HTML and goes, oh, look, here's an image. And it makes another request to get the image. Here's another image. It goes request to get that image. Here's a movie. It goes, makes a request to bring out, it has to bring all this stuff in. And what we do here is that, no, it's just getting that HTML page from the server. So it happens very quickly. Question here? No? Question here. So question is, what is the difference between this and Selenium? Big difference between this and Selenium is that Selenium is automating a browser. So Selenium is an object that knows how to work with a browser and tell that browser to do something. So yeah, let me finish the answer. So Selenium controls the browser interacts with the server. This object interacts with the server directly. So Selenium tells that browser, formulate a request, by making the choices there on the web page and click on a button to send that request on. This just sends the request straight to the server. So the question is, this is more efficient than that, and the answer is, there's less overhead involved, but it's way less capable, right? Because there's no visual interacting with it, right? You've got to create one of these. You've got to create one of these and send it. So you got to create a text string that has just what you want in it. Okay, so maybe I'll leave this example unchanged. And I'll make a copy of it. And instead of get data, I'm going to call this push one survey. I don't know if that's the best name I've ever come up with, but. Okay, so now my URL, I now have actually got sitting over here in C26. So here now for my URL, I'll just say, what sheet is it on? Sheet 1 dot range C26 dot value. Okay, so I'm reading the URL off the sheet, and the sheet, the URL then is built with a bunch of formulas on that sheet. I'm saying open that URL, use the get method, send it, wait for the results, send, and then print the response. All right, let's see what this one does. Here's what came back. And, very good. So, and I can see it tells me my response has been recorded. So I'm looking at the HTML to be able to see that, but it looks pretty good. What did I have? Nephi. So I should see another Nephi in there in my Excel sheet pretty recently. I guess that's it. There's the two that I put in. 605, 1605, 405, yeah, that's the one. Several other views have put that. You put my name instead of your own name, which is interesting. Oh, it was already in there, wasn't it? Yeah, you didn't change it. You could change that to your own so you can see which one actually came from you or to something else. Okay, let's come back to the code. So we've successfully pushed data to that web resource. The key here is being able to formulate the URL that we're trying to send the information to have the data in it. And did it put the right stuff? Let's see, I had 11010, 1101, Nephi 11010. Yeah, so it looks like that's the actual data that I had on it right there. So next step, let's just make it so we could like push up 100 observations. So let's do this. Make another sub. Push many surveys. Now in this case, let's just write a loop and call the push one survey multiple times. Dim x as an integer, where x equals 1 to, why don't we say 50? Inside this loop, I'm going to say application dot calculate. That'll tell the the sheet to recalculate, so we'll get a new draw of random numbers. And then I just want to call push one survey. Go ahead and put events in here, do events. Oh, and why don't we also print out x so we can kind of see where we are, because it'll take a second or so for each one to run. Oh, and I'm printing the response out as well. Let me break that off. Control break. Where's break? Oh. Guess I'm almost there, but I just don't want to be printing that every time. Oh, I barely missed it. So now I should be able to go back to my sheet and have lots more responses. Apparently we got all the Nephi in here, but yeah, I did that pretty quickly. I shouldn't be surprised that you didn't do it at the same time as I did. But that code here now is just making multiple calls for the survey page. And why don't you do that? You know, in fact, I'm going to turn this to 500 and then run it. So we get some data up there, because I'm trying to get a good amount of observations from how Excel generates these ones and zeros. So how many of you are trying to get this going? Or is this just going to be me too? A couple of you? So we won't have that much data going. But any questions on getting up to this point? I'll come around and give a hand. Yeah, let me go ahead and pull up push one survey. Control break. Pause. There's both of them now. You got it? Other questions? So I think while that's clicking along, I should actually be able to see them come in on my Google Sheet. Let's see, control down arrow. So yeah, we've got a few of you bring in some data in. So we've got nearly 1,000 observations. It's coming along. Maybe 500 was a bit ambitious. We're more than halfway there. Okay, so that's, and this just happens to be, something that we can do kind of through the form interface that Google gives us. Did Google set out to say we want a way for VBA to be able to push data onto a Google Sheet? Not at all. It's just that we can duplicate the kind of response that a Google form makes and send that request directly to Google Sheets. Okay, so next what I'd like to see is how am I going to get this data down? And so for that, there's a couple of things. Again, if I wanted to go and pull this data directly, kind of go to a particular row and bring that out, it requires me to authenticate and to be able to go get that data. And we can do that with VBA, but it's really complex. It would probably take us 5 or 6 days just working through that process to get to where we understood it. However, there's another little thing here, and that is you can export this data, just make it publicly available. So I will choose File, Publish to the Web. Not the entire document, just Form Responses 1. And Publish, Are you sure you want to publish it? I am. And so now it's given me this URL is the URL that I can use to pull that data. And that will just, let's see, how did I publish it? It's published as a web page. There's several options I have. I can publish it as comma separated variable and other things and so forth. I'll leave it published as a web page. Let me go ahead and post this onto Learning Suite so you have access to it. Publish that as a link. So if you refresh Learning Suite, you'll have access to that link. But if I just follow that link, it should bring the data right here. No authentication required. Here's just a web page with the data. So if I wanted to pull that data into Excel now, what's the handy tool that will let me do it? Yeah, this is just, that's what the web query was designed for. So I can either just make a web query that goes to that URL, and the nice thing about it is that URL is static. It gets republished about every 5 minutes. So it's not, you know, extremely up to date, but within 5 minutes, that's not too bad. And we can just make a web query because the URL doesn't change. Or, let me show you this. I'm not sure that I might have shown you this module before. This module, mod web query, is one that I wrote that just allows you to automate a web query with a single statement in VBA. So it's called create web query. You give it a range as to where you want it to go. You give it a URL, and it will bring that data in. So let me come back to module 1. Sub, get data. Create web query. First, I tell it a range. Why don't I give it sheet 2 dot cells 1, 1, or range A1, and then the URL that I want to put there. There's a couple other options on there, but this will give us the default. And I want no parentheses. I better go make sheet 2. And got name sheet 2. So that should just put that data. Oh, I've got 2 called get data. Let's call this get survey data. Let's see what I've got wrong here. Create web query. There we go. I had an extra closing parenthesis that didn't belong out there. And that should bring the data here. Is it still running? Looks like it's still running. A little bit of data to bring down. I'll come back to the code while we're waiting for that to finish running. But that'll just bring the data in like any web query. Sometime today. Any questions while we're waiting for that? Surprised that it's taking that long, but looks like it came in. So now here's the data. What do we have? 2,600 rows of data. And we're 22 columns wide. Interestingly, and I'm not sure why this happens, but every time you do this, it does come in with column A hidden. So I'm just going to unhide it. I think I'm going to unhide it. I do not know why it comes in hidden, but it does. So that's kind of the whole loop. That's pushing data up to Google Sheets, pulling it back down from Google Sheets. So let's just do this. I'm just curious. Let's find out what the average of this is. What do I expect the average to be? Yeah, should be about 0.5 if it's unbiased. So that's a little bit lower than I would have expected it to be. But as long as I look at these other ones and, you know, some are a little bit above, some a little bit below, yeah, I'm gonna look at those feeling pretty good about it. Oh, and the average of those then becomes, yeah, 0.50. So, yeah, once we get those 2,000 times 20, what is that? 40,000. Yeah. So yeah, I don't see any reason to think that there's systematic bias in the random number generator. Questions here? Okay, let's look at something else. So instead of pushing ones and zeros, and we could, here we are, right? We can actually put stuff besides ones and zeros into this very form, right? I mean, I set it up as short answer, but it'll take whatever I put into it. So here's the problem. The problem with this approach is that the data that I'm putting up there is publicly available. Anyone with that URL can just go and get the data. So that might be okay if I don't care if everyone has the data, but I might not want everyone to have that data. So how could I put that data in such a way that it's not available to everyone and still be able to get at it? By the way, this is a problem that we deal with in the internet all the time. You may not realize this, but when you connect to the internet, perhaps not actually at your house, but your internet service provider is not, your internet service provider is not connected to the internet the way you are. Your internet service provider is a part of the internet. BYU, you know, is not just, you know, pulling data in, it's a part of the internet. And so the way the internet works is that, you know, all these folks that are out there on the internet, they're actually not just consuming the data from it, but they're also routing other traffic. And that traffic that comes, you know, that comes to BYU, most of it, we don't take into BYU. We look at it and we route it. We send it on. So that's the genius. One of the genius things about the way that the internet works is that it's not that there's someone who has to maintain these servers. Everyone who participates helps the system to work better, because those routers connected, they get requests and they go, oh, this is not for me, and it sends it in the right direction, helps to route it to its ultimate location. That person who's connected to the internet can look at all that traffic. And if that is sent with the HTTP protocol, you see exactly what was sent. You would actually see these names going across. You know, Nephi, you could look at the request and go, oh, that's Nephi. That's the whole reason that we made the HTTPS protocol, because that says, well, take this information and before you send it, encrypt it. So it sends it, so all that data, all the data on the internet goes across in a way that anyone who was snooping could look and see what it was, but it's encrypted. So one thing we could do is we could take the information and we could encrypt it before we put it into the Google Doc. And that way, anyone could look at it and they just wouldn't know what it says. In the same way that they could look at the data as it's in transit, right? As it's going there. Someone who happens to be on a router between me and ultimately where this ends up. By the way, how many routers do you think that request goes through before it gets to Google? What do you think? Maybe a few dozen. That's probably high. It's probably between 15 and 25. There's kind of 15 to 25 folks that can kind of look at that and go, yeah, I saw what you're doing, right? And if you were passing a credit card number, they would go, oh, I saw that credit card number. You know, oh, I saw that password. I saw that username and password, that password pair, which is why that we encrypt it. Okay, so let's do this. Let me put some other data in here. Let me just put, let me get some names. Popular names. The 100 most popular names of 2018. Excellent. What do we need, 20? Think that'll go right in there? Ah, awesome. That's pretty good. Put them over here, split off the dot. Data, text to columns, delimited, split on a space. Okay, so now I have those names there. But let's now come back to mod encrypt. Mod encrypt. So mod encrypt has a function called encrypt. I give it something to encrypt, and I give it a key. Now, you're familiar with, or maybe somewhat familiar with, the encryption that happens, you know, on the internet. It's called public key encryption. It's a really neat trick that allows us to be able to send the key and the data, not the key, but be able to send a hash of the key so that we can decrypt without actually making the key publicly available. We can send something across the internet that allows us to decrypt it without actually knowing the key. So that's public key encryption. What we're going to do is something called private key encryption. We're going to generate a key, and it's never leaving this workbook. I'm just going to put it right here in the workbook. Let's make a key. Maybe I'll put the key here in A1. And it just be some collection of characters. It could be a random collection of characters. It could be something, you know, that I might remember. These are the times that try men's souls. So now, instead of just putting these values here, let me just go ahead and say I want to encrypt this value using this key. And I will fix that reference. So when it copies down, it will and I'm a little worried that that is so short. So now I should be able to send that information up and then be able to pull it back down. But first, let me make sure I can decrypt it. The question is what kind of decryption that it's using, and it's using the encrypt and decrypt procedures that I copied off the internet for VBA. I'm not even sure it has a name. I don't even know how good it is. It's like, oh, here's, no, it's probably not any named encryption procedure. Because it's actually the encryption is actually happening in VBA here. Equals decrypt. I'm going to decrypt this value using this key. And there it is. So we're able to push them, and then pull them back. Okay, good. I was a little worried when Emma was the same length. As often when things are encrypted, they're longer than they are when they're raw. The question is, how do we encrypt? And the answer is, yeah, so I took the value I'm encrypting and then giving it the key. The key, I have to use the same key to encrypt and decrypt. And it might be better to be, you know, some random set of characters. But the point is, I'm not giving this key to anyone else. So that's what I can use to unlock it. Last thing we have to do is to be able to send this up, and there's one more problem here, and that is only certain characters are allowed to be in URLs because they have meaning. If you have an ampersand, it means something. The ampersand is what we use to separate parameters in the URL. The percent sign means something. The period doesn't mean anything. The slash means something. The question mark means something. So if I have any characters here that are not that are reserved characters, I can't just drop them into the URL. I have to encode them in such a way that the server will be able to decode them. And I don't think I've given you a procedure for that, but they are readily available. So let me just come here and look for VBA encode URL. Stack Overflow is usually good for something. So VBA, search for VBA encode URL. And here is a Stack Overflow. Is this the answer? Here's the answer. 87 people agree, so I must agree too. So this is a function called URL encode. I'm just going to copy this. Bring it into my module 1. So now I should be able to call URL encode, pass it some string, and this is expecting an ADO stream, which I don't think I should need. Let's see what this one's expecting. This one looks like it's not expecting that much. This is the second one there on Stack Overflow. I've corrected a little bug that was in there. Okay, we'll take the corrected one. But this one's not relying on any other libraries to do it. And that gives me back an encoded value. Space is not allowed, and so it says that for that space, we're putting a %20. Why %20? Yeah, is that the ASCII code for the space? And the answer is yeah, it's the hexadecimal version of the ASCII code. So the decimal ASCII code for space is 32, hex is 20. So if we have other things in here that are not allowed, they will get encoded the same way. So this encoded version should be what I need to put into the, so I will encode what comes back from encrypt. I think I will. Let me put it over here and see if I can encode it this way. Equals URL encode. That value should be encodable. Is that a problem? Ah, it is a problem, thank you. So I was putting a space in, so no space. URL encode. There we go. So this one's encoded, but it doesn't change because all those characters are allowed. But this one's got the % and the ampersand, both of which have meaning, so those will both get encoded. The ampersand got encoded to %26. The % got encoded to %25. And then the rest of the characters are okay. So now this should be a well-formed URL that I could push up to Google Sheets. Let me come back to my push 1, run that, and go look at my sheet. And that's it. Control home, control down arrow. And so there's that information now all encoded. Meaningless without the key. I can pull that back down and then decrypt it once it comes down, and I've got the values that I'm after without ever exposing them online, even though this resource is publicly available to anybody who has the URL. Whew. Other questions? What else do you want to hear about interacting with the web servers for the next 13 minutes? I appreciate that might be nothing, but if you have any other questions, I'm kind of done with stuff to talk about for today. Unless you want to see us pull it down and decrypt it, we could do that. Could see the responses of forms. Yeah, I think the only way that you could do that is again, if you're the question is, let me repeat with a question. Student says, I have a friend who says he had a program that could see the responses of forms and change them to the opposite.
Right. He sees the responses of forms, and then on his response, he enters in the opposite response with the remote comment.
Oh, so he could enter in the responses separately. So there's kind of a couple ways that you could see the responses to the forms. So one is, of course, if it's published this way, anyone who has the URL can get to it. The other way is if you are just kind of watching traffic go by. But this traffic should be encrypted with Google because they use HTTPS. So it would be difficult to see. So I'm not sure exactly, what environment he's saying he could look and see what those forms, what those are, but yeah. All right, well, if there are any other questions, we'll call it good. Remember, tomorrow, 11 o'clock, I'd love to have someone come by and ask me some questions. I'll be there in room 210. Class dismissed.